Problems 1 and 2 are a review of our special cases from yesterday. So looking at problem number 1, what is that called? A sum of cubes. And the formula for a sum of cubes for the binomial is a plus b. For the trinomial is a squared minus ab plus b squared. And how do I find a and b? Not square root. Take the cube root. So what's the cube root of x to the third? X. Then a plus sign. What's the cube root of 729? 9. Now take the x and square it. That gives us x squared. Put a minus sign. And what does AB mean? Multiply. So when I multiply x and 9, that gives me 9x. And then a plus sign. And the 9 needs to be squared. And that gives me 81. So here's the answer. X plus 9 for the binomial. And x squared minus 9x plus 81 for the trinomial. Number 2, what is this one called? This one is a difference of cubes because we have the minus sign. And the formula for a difference of cubes is going to be very similar to the last formula, except this one's a minus b, and this will be positive ab in the trinomial. And how do I find a and b? Take the cube root. So what's the cube root of 343? And what's the cube root of x to the third? X. So 7x. Put your minus. And what's the cube root of 27? 3. Now take the 7x and square it. So what is 7x times 7x? 49x squared. And then we'll have a plus sign. And what does AB mean? Multiply these. So when you multiply 7x and 3, that gives you 21x. Put your plus sign. And when I take the 3 and square it, that gives me 9. So the binomial answer is 7x minus 3. And the trinomial is 49x squared plus 21x plus 9. So that's just a recap of what we did yesterday. Now the next 12 problems is something new for today, but is actually just a repeat of Algebra 1. So today we're going to be factoring where a equals 1. So when they're talking about a equals 1, they're talking about standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. So when you see on your paper where it says a equals 1, that just means we're talking about a 1x squared today. So we're just going to deal with a 1x squared. So we're going to keep it basic today. Now, when you're factoring, your goal is to figure out what two things were multiplied to give you the polynomial. So notice we have a trinomial. And today our answers will be two binomials. And your goal, you want to figure out what two numbers multiply to the constant and add to the middle coefficient. So that is our goal. What multiplies to 8 and adds to 6. A common practice is to just start listing your factors of 8 and start with 1. 1 times what gives you 8? 8. 2 times what gives you 8? 4. 3 is not a factor of 8. But I could have 4. 4 times what? 4 times 2, but that's the same thing as 2 times 4. So once you start repeating in your list, you can stop writing down your factors. So now in this list, I have a 1 and an 8 or a 2 and a 4. One of these adds up to the middle term, which is 6. So which one of these adds up to 6? 2 and 4. So 2 and 4 need to be included in our answer. Now remember when we're double distributing, this first term needs to be multiplied with the first term. So what times what gives me x squared? So both of these will start with x. So x times x is x squared. And then we'll use our two answers. We'll use positive 2 and positive 4. And that's your answer, x plus 2, x plus 4. It doesn't matter which one you write first because both of these are in parentheses, which means they're multiplied. So does order matter when you're multiplying? No, that's the commutative property. Now to check it, you could double distribute to check your answers. So what's x times x? X squared. What's x times 4? 4x. Distribute the 2. What's 2 times x? 2x. And what's 2 times 4? 8. And when I combine these in the middle, what does that give me? 6x. So did I get the same as the problem? Yes, we did. So you can always check your answer by double distributing. Next one, number 2. We want to find two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to give you 5. Now, if you have to, you can just list out the factors of 6. So start with 1. 1 times what? 6, or I could have 2 times 3, and 2 times 3 is the same thing as 3 times 2, and I would start repeating my list, so I can stop with just those first 2. Now, you'll always need to add up to the middle number, so I need to add up to 5. So if I add 1 and 6, what does that add up to? 7. So it's not that one. If you add these, what do you get? 5. So those are the two numbers we'll use in our answer. So put your 2 sets of parentheses, and one answer will be x plus 2. The other answer will be x plus 3. Now, it doesn't matter which one you put first. You could put x plus 3 first and x plus 2 second. Next one, number 3. We want to find two numbers that multiply to 3 and add to give us 10. Yeah, what are the only factors of 3? 1 and 3. Do those add up to 10? No. So there's not a pair. So what would the answer be? Prime. So there's not a pair that multiplies to 3 and adds to 10. Now, number 4. Still the same process. We want to multiply to the last number and add to the middle term. So if I list factors of 24, I could have 1 times what? 24. I could have 2 times what? 12. I could have 3 times what? 8. I could have 4 times 6. 5 is not a factor, but 6 times 4 is the same as 4 times 6. So once you start repeating your list, go ahead and stop. Now, what do I have to add up to? Negative 14. Well, first look and see which pair even adds to 14. 2 and 12. Yeah, but right now they add up to positive 14, but I need negative 14, so I need to change both of these to negative, because a negative times a negative still gives me a positive. So one of my answers will be x minus 2. The other answer will be x minus 12. So x minus 2 and x minus 12. And how could you check your answer? Double distribute. So x times x is x squared. This would give me negative 12x. Negative 2x gives me the negative 14x. Negative 2 times negative 12, positive 24. So you can always check your answer by double distributing. Next one, number 5. What do we need to multiply to? Negative 36. If I need to multiply and get a negative, that tells me one of the factors has to be what? One of them has to be a negative, so start with negative 1. Negative 1 times what? 36. Negative 2 times what? 18. Negative 3 times what? Negative 4 times what? 9. Negative 5 won't work. Negative 6 times 6. Well, does it really stop? Well, with that one it would, but what about negative 9 times 4? Are these two the same? No, these are different. So if you have a negative thrown in, you'll actually have to keep going. Then the next one would be negative 12 times 3, negative 18 times 2, and negative 36 times 1. So if you have a negative that you're trying to factor, you'll have to keep your list going. So now, what do I need to add up to? positive 5. So which pair adds to positive 5? Negative 4 and 9. So what's one of my answers? X minus 4 and x plus 9. So x minus 4 and x plus 9. Okay, number 6, what do we have to multiply to? Negative 12. So if you have to multiply and get a negative, that means one of your numbers has to be what? Negative. So start with negative 1. Negative 1 times what? 12. Negative 2 times what? Negative 3 times what? Negative 4 times what? 3. Negative 6 times? Negative 12 times 1. To make sure if it's negative, you keep your list going, because negative 3 and positive 4 is different from negative 4 and positive 3. So these two right here are different. So what do we have to add up to? Negative 4. Which pair adds to negative 4? Negative 6 and 2. So what's one of the answers? X minus 6. The other answer is x plus 2. Okay, number 7. How does number 7 look different? We have two variables. They threw in a y, but it's going to be pretty much the same. We still want to multiply to the last number, so we want to multiply to get 54 and add to get 21. So just ignore the extra variable for right now. So factors of 54, I could have 1 times 54, 2 times 27, 3 times 18, 4 times, will 4 work? Will 5 work? Will 6 work? 6 times 9, 7, 8. If I do 9, it's already in my list, correct? Yes. What do we want to add up to? 21. Well, which pair adds to 21? 3 and 18. Now, how were we writing our answers? X plus 3 and x plus what? 18. But what's the difference? We have this y squared. Well, how do you get a y squared? Well, how do we get an x squared? X times x, so how do I get a y squared? Y times y. So x is first, y is second. Now, if I double distribute, x times x is x squared. X times 18y is 18xy. 3y times x is 3xy, writing it alphabetically. And 3y times 18y is 54y squared. And when I combine 18xy and 3xy, what does that give me? 21xy plus 54y squared. So you can always check your answers today by double distributing. So if you have x and y, make sure x is first, y is second. So x times x gave us the x squared. Y times y gave us the y squared. Okay, number 8. I want you to do number 8 and number 9. You do 8 and 9. Okay, problem number 8. We have both variables again, but for right now, just ignore the extra variable. So we still want to look to see what two numbers multiply to negative 32 and add to negative 4. So when I list my factors of negative 32, now if you have to list the factors, that's fine. If you don't have to, that's perfectly good too. So if I have to multiply and get a negative, what does that mean about one of these factors? One of them has to be negative, so start with a negative 1. I could have negative 1 times 32, negative 2 times 16, negative 4 times 8, and then negative 8 times 4, negative 16 times 2, and negative 32 times 1. What do we want to add up to? Negative 4. Which pair adds to negative 4? Negative 8 and 4. Now when I write my answer, I have to be careful because we have x and y. So what would the first answer be? X minus 8y. And what would the second answer be? X plus 4y. So if you have both variables, make sure the x is first, y is second. And then problem 9, we want to multiply to get negative 18. So if I have to multiply and get a negative, what does that mean about one of the factors? One of them has to be a negative. Start with negative 1. I could have negative 1 times 18, negative 2 times 9, negative 3 times 6, negative 6 times, negative 9 times, negative 18 times 1. What do we have to add up to? Positive 3. So which pair adds to positive 3? Negative 3 and 6. So what's one of our answers? X minus 3y. And the second answer would be x plus 6y. Okay, 3 more problems. And if you look at number 10, how is number 10 different from what we've been doing? X is to the cubed power, and all the others have been x squared. So if it's higher than a 1x squared, so looking at your first term, if it's higher than a 1x squared, look for a greatest common factor. So what's a GCF? X. So factor out the x. So x times what gives me x cubed? X squared. X times what gives me 12x squared? 12x. X times what gives me 27x? 27. Now looking inside the parentheses, now it's a 1x squared. So now I can factor it just like what we've been doing. So for this one, I want to multiply to 27 and add to 12. So factors of 27, I could have 1 times 27. What's the other one? 3 times 9. What do we want to add up to? 12. So which pair adds to 12? 3 and 9. Now when you write your answers, your GCF has to go first. And now we're ready to factor what's inside the parentheses. So one of my factors will be x plus 3. What's the other factor? X plus 9. So make sure the GCF is your first answer. So if you factor out the GCF, it has to be included in your answer. Next one, number 11. Ooh. There it is. Okay, number 11. Again, if it's larger than a 1x squared, look for a GCF. So for problem 11, what's the GCF? 2. So factor out the 2. So 2 times what gives me 2x squared? X squared. 2 times what gives me 2x? X. And 2 times what gives me negative 112? Yeah, make sure it's a negative 56. Now, looking inside the parentheses, now we have a 1x squared. So now we can factor this. But make sure the GCF is your first answer. So bring down the 2, and we're going to factor that trinomial. I want to find two numbers that multiply to what? Negative 56. And they have to add up to the number in the middle. Well, what number is in front of this x? Oh, 1. Now, if they have to add up to 1, that means they're going to be side by side on the number line. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. So when I list my factors for negative 56, one of them has to be a negative. So I could have negative 1 times 56. I could have negative 2 times 28. Will 3 work? Will 4 work? 4 times what? Or negative 4 times 14. Negative 5 won't work. Negative 6 won't work. But negative 7 times what? 8. And then they start repeating. Negative 8 times 7. Negative 14 times 4. Negative 28 times 2. Negative 56 times 1. Now we want to add up to positive 1. So which pair adds the positive 1? Negative 7 and 8. And what I was talking about, when they have to add up to 1, that means they'll be side by side on the number line. So just ignoring the negative, 7 and 8 are side by side. They're consecutive numbers. So we have the GCF as our first answer. What would our next answer be? X minus 7, and our last answer, x plus 8. So you have to have all three of those to get credit. So make sure the GCF is first. Okay, I want you to do that last one, problem 12. If it's larger than a 1x squared, what should you look for? Greatest common factor. What was the greatest common factor here? 3x. So 3x times what gives me 3x cubed? X squared. 3x times what gives me negative 9x squared? Negative 3x. And 3x times what gives me negative 120x? Negative 40. Now, the GCF is your first answer. Now that it's a 1x squared, we're ready to factor it. I need to find two numbers that multiply to what? Not 40. Negative 40. So one of those numbers has to be a negative. So I could have negative 1 times 40, negative 2 times 20, negative 4 times 10, negative 5 times 8. And then they start repeating. Negative 8 times 5, negative 10 times 4, negative 20 times 2, negative 40 times 1. Now looking inside the parentheses, what do I have to add up to? Negative 3. Looking inside the parentheses, this is what we're factoring. So we had to multiply to negative 40 and add to negative 3. Negative 8 and 5. So 3x is my first answer. What's my next answer? X minus 8, x plus 5. So you have to have all three of those answers to get full credit.